Well, good evening and welcome to the third in our roundtable discussions. The second was a smaller affair with Paul Fowler, Melissa and myself, in which we investigated what was going on in the markets. And in fact, that hasn't been seen yet. So much like building your own boat on television in the 1950s, we're starting with sailing off into the sunset. And the next one will tell you how to start with the hammer and the saw. So apologies that 3 will be seen ahead of 2, but you know what it's like in television. And what we're going to talk about this evening is there have been pictures of people jammed on planes next to one another, certainly no 6 feet from each other. And some airlines are now illegally operating and taking people on holiday and doing exactly the same thing. But what is going to happen to the travel industry? There are many ramifications. So I'm going to go around at the panel tonight and ask just where they see we're going to fly off to, or for that matter, will we be sailing in the future? Right. Melissa, you're really the furthest away, well, you and Suzanne. So let me actually ask you first, because probably New York is going to be most affected by travel. What's your prognostication? That's a lovely word.
Yes, very lovely. Well, international travel is still not possible here. There are a lot of barriers to opening that up, but I probably see in the next few months, since everything seems to be opening up in the United States, except for New York, although that is opening up slowly as well, you'll start to see probably more lifting of the bans on international travel. Certainly domestically, travel continues. Me personally, I'm going to wait for a while. I might do some road trips. But I see, definitely see issues, not just the airline industry, which was in trouble prior to COVID, but train travel, traveling to work. You know, you're going to definitely see fewer commuters. There's going to a lot of people are going to opt to work from home. In fact, speaking with our CEO last week, productivity is up 30%. He's absolutely thrilled with the result of how people are working from home. So I definitely see a curtailing and a changing, and perhaps some of the major players may not do so well. You may see some bankruptcies coming up. But so that's basically my take on it at this time.
Paul, let's assume that all areas, whether it's trains or planes or whatever, are affected. What's your take on how much it will cost to fly, or for that matter, go by train, because we've been used to very cheap fares? Is that era at an end?
Whom are you asking?
Paul.
I think Paul may have just disappeared.
Ah, all right. Well, then I'm going to ask you to Mark, because you're the next.
He's on a plane.
To New York.
Thanks for being the second choice. I was just thinking about this.
You never travel first class, do you?
Well, if I'd given half the chance, I would. I've tried it once through business, and it didn't really make much difference to the class that I would normally travel in when I pay for it myself. So I'm not totally convinced that it merits the extra cost. But
what's your take on the way that particularly air travel, but other travel as well, is going? Can you anticipate that the fares are going to zoom?
Well, most of certainly the air industry and I guess train and bus are based around cramming as many bodies into a transport vehicle as you can possibly get to share the overhead between as many people as you can possibly get. If we now have to socially distance, just by the very nature of it, the cost of running those vehicles is going to go up per head. So we'll undoubtedly in the short term see prices increase. Maybe the first class passengers will be the first ones catered for, and they'll wait to see what happens for the coach class later on. Maybe that'll happen in a couple of years' time. But people will still want to go out and travel. Maybe there'll be a change in the running costs of travel, aircraft and trains and buses. If we move to an electric model, maybe there'll be innovation that'll come out that'll start to reduce the cost, so you can get smaller units working that'll be more realistic in price to run. For instance, the cost of a bus, I think about 60% of the cost of running a bus is the driver. So that overhead doesn't change regardless of whether you have a big or a small bus. So,
Stephen, we were talking about going to Covent Garden together to sing in the centre of the square. What's your take on it?
I think it's going to be difficult. Both the East Coast main line to Scotland and the West Coast main line to Scotland are now making people book their seat in advance so that loading on specific services may be controlled. And West Coast is saying, no reservation, you don't get on. You must book in advance and reserve a seat. As far as Mark's point about buses, Brighton and Hove buses down here were trying electric and part electric buses, but they were found to be not really viable on long distances. On the Brighton to Tunbridge Wells route, for example, they tend to work better on short inner city journeys. So for longer distance transport, we are perhaps going to look at more hybrid models that can manage better. Air travel, some airlines are already saying they're working on social distancing. I wouldn't trust it even then, because the same air, as you will know, in airplane cabins is recycled. That is the biggest problem that I see to air travel. But by traveling by ship, I have done a couple of cruises which went from Tilbury with no flying involved at all. And Wolfgang and I were supposed to be going up the Rhine last year. I couldn't because I was ill, and we were both supposed to be going to an event called Schweizertag in Tingen, and that has been cancelled. So I don't know. For England, the difficulty is being always, as we have been, extra Schengen, outside the Schengen zone in the European Union. That is slowly being dismantled so that people may travel again between Germany, Austria and Switzerland and France. The UK government having announced that people from France will not have to be isolated for a fortnight when they come here, that's now been reversed. So free travel to and from France now seems unlikely. The only place outside the mainland
is a victim. Annie, can I ask you, because you have relatives abroad, and one of the things that your family like to do is to go home to Hungary. Do you anticipate being able to do it? And would you do it if suddenly the planes are available?
I'm not sure. That's the short answer. I have been looking at tickets, thinking they will be cheaper given the circumstances, but no, they're not. So I assume the airlines just thinks it's fine, it's summer, people will pay just the same amount of money, especially that everyone wants to get out of lockdown and they won't care about the price of the ticket. So they seem to be sure that people will pay the given price. It is already very expensive if I'm looking at August. And I'm not sure. I would love to go, the children would love to go, but
what about the safety aspect? Are you prepared to take the children on a plane at this stage if it became available in, say, July or August?
It's very, very hard to say, to tell you an answer. I'm not sure, because it really isn't safe. On the plane, like Stephen said, you breathe in the same air. So, and of course, social distancing will be non-existent at the airports. It's just not possible.
Suzanne, I can see you now, and you're just as far away from me as Melissa. What's your take on traveling within and outside the United States?
Well, I can say I miss it. I miss every aspect of flying, even the lines and the waiting. And waiting to show my passport. Last year, I traveled to about, I think, 8 countries last year. It was like one of my biggest travel years. And then to not do anything, it's so disappointing. I would even look forward to my luggage being lost, I think. Anyway, I'm kidding. But what I do think that people will start flying. And I do think they'll be flying internationally, and I think that they'll be paying, you know, basically the same, if not more, to fly. When this all started to happen, and when they called the stay-at-home order in New York, I was actually in Vancouver, and I was on my way to fly back here to New York. And I was so nervous because, you know, our president has a great way of communicating. And so he said, you know, American citizens may not be able to get back. And I'm like, what is he talking about? And so I still remember in Vancouver, you actually enter the United States while you're still in Vancouver, while you're still in the airport. So when I got my ticket to go in, and then this sliding door opened, and then I went through the sliding door, I literally almost came to tears. I'm like, Suzanne, you're such a dork, you know. But anyway, I think it's something, I think people are just naturally travelers. I think the world is global. I don't think that that's going to change. I think that people will continue to do crazy things just like they're doing now. And my hope is that, you know, not many people are lost because of it. I really honestly don't think travel will stay this way for long. I think it's going to pick up again. And I would definitely get on a plane, but I have 3 kids, so my husband won't let me. So, but.
You're very lucky, because if you went through Vancouver Airport a few years ago, you would have seen me standing in the middle interviewing people. I used to do a daily interview show from the middle of Vancouver Airport. It has changed since then. Now, who have I not got? Mark, I've asked you. Melissa, Stephen, is there somebody else lurking over there or over there that I can't see?
We did have Paul, but he seems to have disappeared.
We've actually, with excellent answers, but we've actually eaten up a certain amount of our time. So let's go around again for a quickie, as they would say. And one question that I would ask is, you know, at one time, traveling was an absolute pleasure. If you traveled on the train in Britain, you got decent food, you got decent service, you got a bit of soot in the eye from the steam trains, but generally speaking, you were made a fuss of. And that was true in the early days of flying. It's all changed now. Everybody is jammed in like a sardine. Do you think that will ever change, Melissa?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think at this point, given the problems in the industry, it may just stay the same. Yeah, it used to be very pleasurable. I mean, you can actually fit your legs in, but now you're really crammed up there, and you got to pay, I guess, $10 extra just be able to sit comfortably. I don't see it changing. I'd love to see it change, but I think given the volume, as Suzanne mentioned, I think that they're going to continue, and as Annie mentioned, people are just going to want to fly, so they're not going to make any exceptions. They're just going to continue to try to operate in this way, and maybe they might not give us biscuits, so they might come back.
You mentioned Schengen, and it's disappearing, which means that you'll have to show your passport at a good many more passport points. Now, how do you see the passport problem? Because even before the viral problem, you queued for hours at any airport, waiting to either get into a country or get out of it.
Well, it was only if one was going to or from the United Kingdom. Once one was in Europe, the Schengen zone meant you travelled between countries without having to show one at all. It's always been difficult because England has always been, as they called it in Belgium and France, extra Schengen, outside of any agreement. My favourite way of travel, bugger airlines, is actually train. And there was nothing like the Brighton Bell, where one paid a supplement of 6 shillings, 30 pence, to travel in this wonderful Pullman train. And I really like, for travelling abroad, the Orient Express. But I live in the past, you see, and I don't quite understand jet propulsion.
I agree with you, because on the old Brighton Bell and on the Pullman Express, you could have a brandy for breakfast, which is my favourite, of course. Mark, what's your take on it?
Oh, The travel, well, you can actually still travel by Orient Express, not necessarily at the moment, but you can probably afford to buy your own aeroplane with the cost. It's not the cheapest mode of transport these days. I like to travel by train. I've never really had any problems. I traveled across Europe. Recently, I've been traveling around Europe. I haven't had any real problems with queues or significant issues. I've noticed that the quality of the flight is slightly diminished. You don't get the food that you did in the past. Not that I was particularly enamored with it anyway, but the decision has been made that for short haul flights you don't need it. So cost cutting taking place all round, and I'm guessing that will continue. They'll have to find ways of clawing back the cost that the industry has had to face this time round. I do see that flight prices will increase because of that. It's an industry, to the best of my understanding, that works on quite thin margins. So they'll have to make up their reserves somehow over the coming years. But I do also agree with Suzanne. I think that flights will start returning. I think we'll get probably at the business end happening sooner, where people can be charged a little bit more and they'll pay a premium for proper distancing, and then there'll be a system that'll be worked out to allow cheaper travel after that. And then maybe people also will either calm down, or a vaccine will be created, and things will start to return to a more normalized approach. Or we'll be made to wear biohazard suits with our own little mask on a flight, so you have your own personal bubble. You might be up against somebody centimeters away from them, but you'll be in your own little personal breathing bubble.
Henny, you were born before steam trains. How you ever survived, I have no idea. But how would you feel about traveling in luxury? Or would you be happy to keep prices the way they are and go in the grim conditions that we do today?
I would like the prices to go even lower if it's possible. I mean, when you pay for a family of four, it's not that cheap anymore. So yeah, I'm not sure. Is it worth it to pay the extra 10, 20, 50 pounds? Do you really fly in better conditions? Unless you're, yeah. So
Well,
it depends on the length of the flight as well. If it's only for 2 hours, 2.5, it's okay. And as a parent, you usually pray that your children will be well behaved.
Well, I'll tell you something, Annie. In the old days, you could smoke in an aeroplane.
For you.
Final word from you, Suzanne.
Thing to say.
A final word from you.
Oh, sure. Well, last year, my first really, really long flight was to Dubai. So it was about 15 hours, and I was in business class, and I honestly didn't want the flight to end. If they noticed I was awake, they'd come over and ask me if I wanted champagne. I mean, it was the perfect world up in the skies. So it is completely worth the extra money. Do I have it? No, but I just so happened that I was able to fly that way that one time. But I do think it's funny that now you're so appreciative if they give you a free drink, when you do Comfort Plus, and you pay the extra $100 because you get to get on earlier, get your carry-on baggage in the overhead bin first, and then you get a glass of wine, and you're just like, oh yeah, that was definitely worth $100.
Well, they don't pay me, but Emirates, if you travel steerage, as I call it, on Emirates, it's better than business class on most other airlines. I must send this to them, if I may, Mark, because perhaps they'll give me a free flight. Anyway, thank you all members of the panel. We've run out of time, and I think that it was a very useful discussion, because travel is going to be a key issue of the future. Just before we leave, if I can have the final word, and that is that I had some video of people flocking into one of the parks in London. I don't know whether it's Regent's Park or St James's yesterday, and virtually embracing one another. And then there were people carrying signs saying, "We want to have freedom," as if there is a terrible conspiracy against any of us having freedom. But I spent some time in the Balkans, and freedom does not come without responsibility. And one of the big problems that our legal people have is trying to persuade people abroad in those countries that rule of law should prevail. And I wonder whether rule of law is under threat in this country. Thanks for being with us. Toodle pip.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.